Siti Najlata.
My name is Ahmad Abdul Rahman.
My name is Afamja Sofia Samudra. We want to explain chapter 4 application of Heckscher-Ohlin between Malaysia and Singapore.
Okay, for the introduction, trade is not just about the exchange of goods and services. It reflects the economic priorities, resources plan, and strategic direction of nation. One of the most enduring trade relationships in Southeast Asia is between Malaysia and Singapore. Despite their shared history, these two nations have developed distinct economic identity, where Malaysia has resources rich and labor abundant, while Singapore has the capital intensive, technology driven, and also capital. In the next part, we'll introduce about the Heckscher-Ohlin theory. This theory developed by Eli Heckscher and Bertin Ohlin states that countries export goods that intensively use their abundant factors of production and import goods that require scarce factors. And in our group assignment, our focus will be to analyze in 2025 where Malaysian and Singapore trade using the Gaussian data against the Heckscher-Ohlin prediction. And our objective, understand the trade pattern and test economic theory in Southeast Asia. Okay, the next part will be given by Mr.
For Malaysia Economic Growth Strategy, Malaysia has trade nation energy policy 2022 until 2024 because energy plays a key role in the positive development of countries. Therefore, all citizens, regardless of background of study, can enjoy economic opportunity and good quality of life. The energy sector contributes to 28% of Malaysia's GDP and employs 35% of the nation's workforce. Petroleum revenue accounts for 31% of government income, while 30% of Malaysia's export are derived from the energy sector. Malaysia's performance from 2023 until 2024, GDP increased by 4%, export and import expand to grow by 5.1% and 4.6%. 5.6% to total export come from manufacturing sector. The labor force is 60.6 million people, while the unemployed rate declined by 3.4%. Malaysia medaling 7 economic target over 10 years. Malaysia will become one of top 30 largest economy in the world. 45% of GDP will generated by full worker wage, female labor participation. The physical deficit will not exceed 3% of GDP. Malaysia will rank among the top 25 least corrupt countries in the world. Malaysia will be among the top 25 countries in terms of living, education and public health. Lastly, long-term social stability will be maintained. For Singapore Economic Growth Strategy, Singapore is more developed country in social despite its small and its small size and lack of the natural resource. Singapore does not rely on natural resource. It relies on international trade as its main source of income. Singapore port is one of the busy in the world. Singapore is become global logistic hub as goods from major countries are shipped, recognized and distribution to other countries. GDP growth in 2023 1.8%. GDP growth in 2024 4.4% derived by coal, trade, finance, insurance and electronic manufacturing. Projected GDP for 2025 grows by 1% to 3%. Economic structure, service sector contribute 73.2% of the country. Good production sector contribute 22%. Labor market and productivity unemployment rate only 2%. Productivity increased by 3.6% due to higher skill and technology use. More productive sector, information and community increased 10% and transportation increased 6%. For wage and inflation unit labor can increase by 1% slower than 6.5% in 2023. International trade, main trade partners, China, USA and Malaysia. Export is increased by 5.7%, import increased by 7.8%.
Okay, now I will present the Heckscher-Ohlin theory, also known as the Heckscher theory, and explain the three men behind it. This theory was introduced by Heckscher in 1990 and further developed by Heckscher-Ohlin in 1953. Unlike Ricardo's theory that focused on labor productivity, the Heckscher theory emphasized the importance of a country's resources or factor endowments such as labor, capital and land. The main idea is simple. A country will export goods that use its abundant and cheap resources and import goods that use its scarce and expensive resources. For example, a labor-rich country like Malaysia will export labor-intensive products such as textiles, while a capital-rich country like Singapore will export capital-intensive products such as electronics or machinery. This theory gave a more realistic and structured explanation of global trade, especially among countries with different resource levels. Now let's take a look at the three key factors in the Heckscher theory. The first one is factor endowment. Factor endowment refers to the total amount of production resources like labor and capital that are available in a country. For example, Malaysia has a large labor force while Singapore has a strong capital base. Each country has different resources and this difference is the starting point for trade specialization. The second one is factor abundance. This concept is about comparing factor endowments between countries to see which resource is more abundant. We usually measure it using the capital labor K per L ratio or the wage to rent W over R ratio. If Singapore ratio is higher than Malaysia, then Singapore is capital abundant while Malaysia is labor abundant. And the last one is factor intensity. Factor intensity refers to the relative amount of factor used in the production of a good but not in countries. For example, if a good use more capital compared to labor, it is capital intensive. If it uses more labor, it is labor intensive. So a capital abundant country will specialize in producing and exporting capital intensive goods and vice versa. So in summary, Heckscher theory explains that countries should export products that use their abundant resources intensively and import those that use their scarce resources. It is based on three concepts: factor endowment, factor abundance, and factor intensity, and together they provide a deeper understanding of international trade patterns.
Now that we have go through the economic profile of Malaysia and Singapore, let's dive into how we conducted our analysis. Our methodology followed a structure. The approach to the step of Heckscher-Ohlin theorem. In the first step, you can see that we begin by identifying each of the country's factor endowment, their available labor and capital resources. For this, we collected the data from authoritative resources including the Department of Statistics, Malaysia Joseph, Singapore Department of Statistics, World Bank, and IMF reports. For the labor, we look at the total workforce size. That is 60.6 million in Malaysia compared to 3.57 million in Singapore. The employment rates and productivity metrics, average wages in Malaysia compared to Singapore, and for the capital, we examine the gross fixed capital formation, the investment in technology and infrastructure for capital and intensive sector. This comprehensive data collection gives us a clear picture of each country's fundamental resources. Step 2 for the factor and abundance determination. With the endowment data in hand, we then determine which factor were relatively evident in each country using two methods. Firstly, the physical evidence approach, where we calculated the capital to labor ratio. Singapore ratio of RM 112,243 per workers was significantly higher than Malaysia by 67,469, clearly indicated Singapore capital evidence. Secondly, we use the price and evidence method comparing wage to rent ratios. Singapore high wages and efficient capital use further confirms capital evidence, while Malaysia lower labour costs supported its labour evidence classification. And step 3 is the factor intensity evaluation. Finally, we analyze the factor intensity of each country's export. We examine measure labour-intensive export like palm oil and electronic assembly, Singapore capital-intensive exports such as pharmaceutical and high-tech machinery. We use the relative factor intensity to quantify this relationship, ensuring our findings were accurately grounded. As the provision for the methodology, this approach allows us to significantly test the Heckscher-Ohlin theorem prediction by combining quantitative data with theoretical analysis. We created a robust framework for understanding the Malaysia and Singapore trade relationship.
The important facts in the analysis for factor endowment individual show difference between factor endowment Malaysia and Singapore. You can see difference between GDP Malaysia and Singapore. Malaysia 1.751 trillion, while Singapore 1.44 trillion. Total labour force in Malaysia 60.6 billion, Singapore only 3.57 billion. Manufacturing sector 2.64 billion, Singapore 100,000 billion, 60,000 billion, 300 million, 300,000 billion, 300,000. Capital for Malaysia 1.13 billion, where Singapore is more larger, 401 billion. Export manufacture 75.4 billion, Singapore 19 billion. For table factor abundance, as we can see, factor abundance in this table, K/L ratio in Malaysia is lower than Singapore. So Malaysia is labour abundant. This is because Malaysia has more labour than the relative capital. Singapore is capital abundant because Singapore is high capital but small of labour. Factor intensity from this table, factor intensity show Malaysia is labour intensive because 2.65 million people able to produce 76.96 million. Singapore capital intensive because small labour can able to produce high capital. So Singapore is capital abundant.
For the conclusion in our group assignment, so we get the result of empirical analysis of Malaysia and Singapore trade. Malaysia and Singapore trade patterns support the Heckscher-Ohlin theorem. So that's all from us. Thank you so much.